How to conduct an experiment in 6 easy steps. As we go on with our lives, we notice things. We look at things and then we become curious about them. Why does one group of students perform better on an exam than others? How does the color of your clothing affect the way other people perceive you? Or what makes one granola bar more appealing than another one? These are all questions that come into our mind at some point of any time. Well, these questions are important because you thought of them. And mainly they're important because such questions inspire research. So next time something will make you curious, stop for a moment. Try to observe and understand what is happening. Take a picture of it because you can look at it later. This is an important aspect of research because you have to pick something that makes you curious, something that you will be passionate about, and something that will make you stop. Remember, if you're passionate about the project, then it will be interesting, it will be meaningful, and not only to you. After finding something that makes you interested, look at previous research. Has anybody else looked at what you are interested in right now? Maybe previous research will show you results that will make you surprised. Maybe it will give you a direction as to where your experiment should be because something has been left untested. Or maybe you will discover a new aspect of designing that experiment because it's no longer applicable. Background information is very important, and previous studies will help you. They will inspire you into conducting a very well-designed experiment that will help you find some sort of significance. At this point, you should have a very clear idea about what it is that you want to do. You should form a specific question that you'll be asking throughout your study. Identify the independent variable, which will be the one that you're manipulating, and then identify the dependent variable, which is the one that you'll be measuring. Remember, in variables like happiness or tiredness, the definition of happiness and tiredness might be very tricky. When you're conducting research, you want other people to be able to reconduct the study. So make sure to form an operational definition for dependent variables like happiness and tiredness. Last, make sure to form a clear hypothesis that states exactly what your direction is and what your answer to your specific question is. Once you come up with a question, think of an experiment that will test your hypothesis in the best way possible. Think if your setup should be an experimental or a non-experimental. If you're looking at a cause and effect relationship, then you'll need to manipulate something, making your study an experimental. If again you're only looking at relationships, you will not need to manipulate anything, and that will make your study a non-experimental. Remember which your sample is going to be. Try to think who your participants will be and if they will fully represent the population that you're making your hypothesis about. When designing your study, you should also think of confounding variables. A confounding variable can be a third variable that you might not be aware of, but that will affect the relationship between the independent and dependent variable. Confounding variables are very dangerous, so try to set up an experiment that will stay away from confounding variables as much as possible. At this point, you should also think of a consent form. Depending on the type of experiment that you have and the role that your participants are playing, you might need one. A consent form is necessary because the participants need to know what they're doing, why they're doing it, and the risks that are involved. You should always inform the participants that they're doing this voluntarily and they could step in at any moment. This is the time that you've all been waiting for, the time you conduct your experiment. It's important to remember that unless your behavior is one of the variables you're manipulating, you should act very appropriate and friendly towards the participants. No participant is going to want to participate in a study where the researcher is unpleasant, rude, or inappropriate. As you conduct the study, try to observe your participants and write down any observations that you might have that seem interesting. You should also record any sort of findings that you find, maybe even outside your collectible data. Last, remember to enjoy. This is a very exciting part of your project and you should have fun. After collecting all your data, you're going to want to analyze the data and find some results. But before you do that, you will need to very carefully think about what statistical test you will need to use. Depending on the type of experiment that you will have conducted, you will need to use a different test. You might need to use a non-parametric test like a chi-square or a parametric one like an ANOVA. Remember, this is extremely important because without the right test, you're not going to find a significant result. Now, after you put your data in the right test, you might have three possible outcomes. The first outcome will be finding a significant result that you predicted, which is always great. Second result is finding a significance that you did not predict, which is also great because it's still some sort of significance. The third possible result is finding no significance, which, even though sounds contrary, still is very significant because it identifies that there's no relationship, which might be just as important as identifying a relationship. Remember, all sort of results are significant. There is no result that is not important. Your study is now complete. You have identified a significant relationship no matter what your results are, and you have contributed to the scientific world. Your findings are important, so share them. Write a paper, make a YouTube video, and post it online so that people can become aware of the thing that made you curious and that you've answered. It's very important, so make sure to not undermine your study and try to share it as much as possible. Your study has made previous studies better. You identified something that was left unexamined or was not mentioned at all, and you've identified it, you've talked about it, and you found some sort of significant result. That's very important because then future researchers can look at your study and they can have further questions that are very inspirational. And now you have left your footprints in research and psychology.